I want to take advantage of Doris. I don't mean it like that.
After an asteroid breaks off from Jupiter, it heads directly on a collision course toward Earth. As it enters Earth's atmosphere, several news channels report that a meteorite is expected to hit the United Kingdom in a few hours. Not long after, the meteorite lands in a park in Peckham, London. Someone at the park records a video of how it happened, and as it goes viral, everyone notices that a man was sitting in the direct path of the meteor. The man eventually turns out to be a postman named Bob, who lives in the area. After the meteor strikes Bob, he's rushed to the hospital, but he escapes before he can receive proper treatment. A few hours later, news channels start reporting that a number of people have seen a flying man in Peckham. Everyone soon realizes that it's Bob, and they start wondering if the meteorite had anything to do with Bob's new ability. As Bob enjoys his new power, he eventually flies through a tall building called the Shard, causing thousands of pounds worth of damage. After several new channels start reporting this, Bob turns himself in to the Ministry of Defense.
A man flying through the Shard.
While he's being taken to a secret location, he sees some people cheering for him on the road. As he tries to wave at them, he unknowingly breaks his cuffs and realizes that he has super strength. However, he just continues cooperating with the cops because he doesn't want to cause more harm or damage. After this, Bob is taken to a special facility where the Ministry of Defense tests his abilities and figures out the limits of his powers. At the facility, Bob works with some scientists to get better at flying, shooting lasers from his eyes, and lifting heavy objects. An official at the Ministry of Defense, Teresa, mentions that after Bob's powers were perfected, the government believed it was only right to unveil him as a hero. Following this, Bob is unveiled as a hero called Superbob, and it is also announced that he'll be working for the UK government and the Ministry of Defense. 6 years later, Teresa hires a production team to shoot a documentary about Bob. Teresa is the first one to be interviewed, and she introduces herself as the head of the Emergency Response Unit.
Okay, I can't use your name even?
No.
Okay.
At the Ministry of Defense. The director asks if she can talk about her role, but she says she can't. The director then asks if she can talk about the reason they're shooting a documentary for Bob. Teresa says it's to show everyone the other side of Bob that most people don't see. She says that the documentary will help people realize that Bob is just a regular guy who can fly. After this, the production team heads to Bob's house, and while they're outside, they hear him complaining on the phone about his gas bills. When he opens the door, he looks shocked to see the cameras, and he quickly ends the call. The director then introduces himself and says that Teresa sent them. He adds that he believes Teresa has already told Bob about the documentary. Bob says she has, and he tells the director to wait outside for a second. The director sounds confused. Bob just closes the door. When he opens it again, he fakes a deep voice while trying to greet the production team, but the director says he can use his normal voice. As Bob tries different accents to sound natural, his cleaner, Doris, suddenly arrives and enters the house. She ignores the cameras and asks if Bob has cleaned his sheets. Bob looks embarrassed and says he hasn't done that yet, and Doris says she'll get to it. Before she does this, she walks toward the door and asks why there's a production team outside the house. Bob says they're trying to shoot a film to show that he's normal. Doris finds this funny and jokes that she wishes the production team good luck.
Good luck.
Shortly after, Bob welcomes the production team into the house, and he's asked to introduce himself. Bob then says his name and adds that he's a civil servant. The director implies that he thought Bob was going to call himself a superhero. Bob says they don't use that name at the Ministry of Defense, but it's fine if the public calls him that. He says it's a job for him, and he has shifts just like everyone else. The director then asks what his typical day looks like, and Bob starts explaining how he goes about saving people. He also shows the director a form that people have to fill out after he saves them. Interestingly, not many people like this, and there also happens to be a report of when Bob tried to get a baby to sign one of the forms. Teresa doesn't understand why people don't like filling out forms, and she says it's just a way to keep things on record. After this, the director asks if Bob has a girlfriend. Bob finds this funny, but eventually mentions that he's single. The director asks why, and Bob says he's just really busy.
Superbob does not have a girlfriend.
Shortly after, Bob takes the production team around Peckham, and he says he's really popular around there. Interestingly, most people on the road don't seem to care much about Bob, and he also walks past a small signboard showing the latest comment from a senator named Jackson, who believes that Bob is super dangerous. After this, Bob takes the production team to a nearby church and says he likes singing with the choir on his days off. Even though Bob really enjoys being there, he happens to be a bad singer, and the other members don't like this. As he keeps disrupting the practice session, the choir master announces that Bob can leave because they're done for the day. When Bob leaves the church, he looks excited and tells the director that he enjoyed himself so much. He adds that they were so good that the choir master had to let everyone go home early. After he says he's really happy to be a part of the community, the singing continues inside the church, and he looks disappointed because he now knows that he was kicked out.
You know, it's an honor to have him.
Following this, he returns home and goes to his desk. He then talks about how he likes working on some personal projects when he's free. He says the one he's currently working on, which involves making an object with leaves, is for someone special. Almost immediately, Bob's mom, Pat, calls his phone, and as he answers it, she refers to him as David. Bob corrects her and says she's talking to her son, but Pat says she doesn't have one because if she did, he would visit her more frequently. Bob continues trying to prove that he's her son, but Pat insists that he's not. Bob then turns to the production crew and explains that his mom has dementia. He adds that even though he doesn't think she sometimes fakes it, he feels it's just a convenient disease for her. Pat says she heard that, and as she calls him Bob, he assumes that she was probably messing with him earlier. After the call ends, the director asks if there are downsides to Bob's amazing life.
So are there any downsides to your amazing life?
Bob says it sometimes gets lonely, and before the director can ask another question, Bob's security, Barry, enters the room and tells Bob to help him open a bottle of jam. After Bob does this, Barry immediately heads out. Bob says Barry is his security guy, and that he often struggles to open things because he has big hands. The director doesn't seem to understand why Bob has a security guy, but Bob says it's a union thing. The director then tells Bob to talk more about feeling lonely. Bob says he has just always wanted to have a partner, but things haven't worked out for him. He then mentions that things are about to change because he has a date. The director asks when he last went on a date, and Bob says it was 6 years ago. Doris laughs in the bathroom, and Bob tells her to stop interrupting his interview.
Doris, I'm trying to do an interview.
Shortly after, Bob leaves the house again with the production team, and the director asks about his date. Bob says her name is June, and she's the most beautiful girl in Peckham. He says she's a very interesting girl, and he remembers their first conversation. He says she asked if he had read a book titled House of Leaves, and when he said he hadn't, she recommended it to him. As they walk toward the library, Bob says it's where June works. He then talks about House of Leaves and how it was a really complicated book. He says he didn't eventually read it, but talking about the book surely helped him get closer to June. The production team then stops at the library to ask June a few questions. Interestingly, June has always had a crush on Bob, and she says she looks forward to seeing him on his days off. She says most people are used to seeing him around, but she still can't get over it. She says that Bob is not like most guys, and he loves reading. She adds that he read her favorite book, and she believes it was a romantic gesture because she knows how complicated the book is. She also talks about how Bob kept hanging around her desk after he read her favorite book. She says it made her feel he was interested in being with her, so she asked him out on a date. She then looks excited as she mentions that their first date is today. Shortly after, the production team meets up with Bob near a parcel collection office. Bob says it's where he used to work, but before he can say anything else, a woman named Maureen calls him to stand in line for her so that she'll be able to get to the butcher's shop before it closes. Bob initially hesitates, but Maureen convinces him to help her. While he's standing in line, the director asks about June. Bob then talks about how he kept going to the library every week to borrow different books to impress June, even though he never read any of them. He says he was also amazed when she asked him out. Shortly after, Maureen returns, and as Bob is about to leave, he gets a text from Therasa saying she wants to take him shopping for clothes for his date. Bob says he doesn't need her because buying clothes can't be a hard thing to do.
She wants to take me shopping for clothes for the date.
However, when he gets home, he realizes that he doesn't have nice clothes for his date, and he begs Doris to help him buy new ones. Doris refuses to do this, but after he promises to get her something, she agrees to follow him to the store. On the way, Doris flirts with a guy named Carl, and Bob looks confused because he thought she was dating someone else named Javier. An old lady also insults Bob and calls him a lazy man for not being at work, but Doris tells him to ignore her. They eventually stop to get something to eat, and while they sit together, Bob asks about Javier. Doris says they broke up a while ago because Javier was always taking her bowling. Bob then says he understands because he knows that Doris hates bowling. Shortly after, they get to the clothing store, and the director interviews Doris. Doris introduces herself and says she's Bob's cleaner. She says she also works at the care home where Pat lives, and it was actually Pat who convinced her to work for Bob because she knew he needed help with things around the house. She says she came to the United Kingdom to raise money to pay for a nursery in Colombia, but she still hasn't reached her target despite spending 6 years in the country already.
Do you like this?
No.
Bob doesn't find nice clothes at the store, and as they head to another one, he tells Doris about his plans to fly June to a monastery in Tibet for their first date. Doris finds this funny and says he's doing too much. She adds that Bob can just take her to a normal restaurant without having to fly her anywhere. She also mentions that he has to keep things simple and ask her lots of normal questions on the date. She says that if things go well on the first date, he can fly her anywhere she wants, but he can't just play all his cards at once. At the second store, Bob's phone suddenly rings while he's talking to Doris, and she seems pissed. She then tells him to turn off his phone when he's with June, because women don't like their dates being interrupted. Bob still answers the phone, and it turns out to be Teresa, who tells him to come to work immediately. Bob says it's his day off, but Teresa insists that he has to come because it's an emergency. After Bob ends the call, he tells Doris that he's heading to work. Doris looks confused and asks about his date, but he says he'll postpone it. Doris says he can't do that, and she advises him to say no to Teresa sometimes.
No, that's
Sometimes
not
you
my...
have to say no.
Bob says he can't just say no, but Doris thinks he can because it's not really a hard thing to say. Bob doesn't believe this, and he talks about how Doris has had multiple partners over the years because she can't say no to them. Doris looks annoyed, and Bob realizes he shouldn't have said that. He apologizes, but Doris just tells him to go away. Shortly after, Bob arrives at work and learns that he has been called in just for a handshake. Bob asks if the handshake is a code for something else, but Teresa says she needs him for a photo op to show that he's not dangerous, like a U.S. senator named Jackson is making people believe. Interestingly, it turns out that the U.S. recently started a smear campaign against Bob after the U.K. refused to let him work for them full-time. Bob cannot believe that Teresa really called him in for a photo op, and while they're in a meeting to discuss the strategies for the photo op, he asks if it has to be today. Teresa says it can't be another day because representatives from different countries are already in the country for a weapons summit later tonight.
At all. They didn't see him as a threat.
Bob asks about his date, but Teresa says June can wait. Bob looks disappointed and heads out to tell June that he can't make it for their date. Interestingly, June takes it quite well, and Bob seems pissed that he's letting down a really nice person. He then heads back to the meeting and tells Teresa that he's not staying for the photo op because it's his day off. Teresa looks shocked, but Bob walks away and calls Doris to tell her that he just said no to his boss, and he'll now be able to take June to the restaurant. Shortly after, Bob arrives at the restaurant, but June doesn't show up. As he continues waiting, Doris suddenly comes in and asks why his phone is off. Bob says he was following her advice, and he asks why she seems angry. Doris then mentions that she has been trying to reach Bob because his mom fell and hurt herself.
Your mother fell.
Shortly after, Bob heads to the care home to meet his mom. There, Pat says she really wants Bob to find a nice girl and get married to her. She says it's all she wants, but Bob doesn't seem interested in that. As Pat then threatens to kill herself, Bob stops her and says he has been seeing someone. Pat asks if he's telling the truth, and as Doris walks past the room, Bob says Doris is his new girlfriend. Pat looks really excited, and Doris enters the room when she hears her name. Pat says she's really happy with Bob's choice because she loves Doris. Doris doesn't understand what's going on, but Bob eventually takes her out of the room to explain what happened. Doris says she can't lie to Pat, but Bob begs her to play along because he has never seen his mom so happy. Doris then agrees, and they eventually attend a small party to celebrate the wedding anniversary of an old couple at the care home. There, Pat starts telling her friends that Bob is now dating Doris. Bob also gets invited to the front to give a speech. Since he doesn't really know what to say, he just gives a dull speech about how the couple is really old and how they must enjoy being together at such an old age.
My heart, I can't.
Doris smiles when she hears this, and after Bob is done with his speech, they dance together. Interestingly, Doris's ex-boyfriend, Javier, works at the care home, and he stares at Bob strangely. Bob then asks Doris if it isn't weird that Javier is watching them. Doris says it's over between them, and she continues dancing with Bob. Surprisingly, they seem to have a connection, and as Bob also feels attracted to her, he levitates slightly while holding her. Shortly after, June's call interrupts the moment, and Bob heads out to talk to June. He complains that he waited at the restaurant, but she apologizes for not making it. He then talks about what he has been making for her, and she asks if she can come to his place to see it. Bob agrees and says he'll be expecting her. Elsewhere, Jackson appears on a talk show and says that Bob is dangerous. He adds that Bob failed to show up to shake hands with him, and that the UK government can't continue to have full control over a dangerous weapon. The talk show host says Bob is a man, but Jackson insists that he's a weapon, which the Ministry of Defense has no control over.
Superbob does not hold any resentment.
Shortly after, Bob returns to the party and sits silently at a table with Doris. One of Doris's friends then sits with them and asks about their relationship because she doesn't believe that they're really together. Doris says they are, and she talks about how Bob has always been obsessed with her. Bob feels embarrassed, but he just plays along because his mom is right behind them. After a while, Bob and Doris head home together, but they don't say anything to each other. Suddenly, Bob sees some ambulances heading toward a crash site, and he says he has to help out. Elsewhere, Teresa joins the talk show and tells Jackson that Bob is not dangerous. Jackson says Bob hates the United States, but Teresa denies this. She adds that Bob loves everyone, and the Ministry of Defense has control over him. Almost immediately, the host gets a report that Bob is helping people at a crash site. The host mentions that if it's true, it means that Bob is going against his unsanctioned Tuesday day off. Teresa looks speechless, and Jackson says it's clear that she has no control over Bob.
Superbob hates America.
Teresa immediately heads to the crash site and confirms that Bob is really helping out. She sounds pissed and tells him to leave because he can't work on his day off. Bob says he can help, but Teresa insists that he has to leave. Bob refuses to do this, but as he tries to help a lady who is stuck inside her car, she eventually dies. Bob looks disappointed and leaves the scene immediately. When Bob gets home, he realizes that he's not with his keys, and he waits for Doris to arrive. After a while, Doris arrives, opens the door, and goes inside with Bob. Bob still looks disappointed about what happened earlier at the crash site, and he tells Doris that his job was really tough today. Doris then sits with him and consoles him. Almost immediately, someone knocks on the door, and Bob says it's June. Doris asks what she's doing at the house, and Bob says he invited her over for a dinner date. Doris looks disappointed, but she tells Bob to change into nice clothes while she opens the door for June.
Go to your room. Go to your room. Do you need to clean up?
After Bob is done changing his clothes, June looks happy to see him. Doris seems jealous because she likes Bob, and she leaves the house immediately. Shortly after, Bob shows June the house of leaves he made, but she doesn't really like it. She also mentions that her favorite book is House of Cards, not Leaves. Bob looks disappointed and says it would have been really easy to make a house of cards. They eventually sit together for their date, but Bob doesn't seem to like June. He also can't help but think about Doris, and he realizes that he's in love with her. After they're done eating, Bob tells June that even though he thinks she's a wonderful person, he doesn't think he can be with her. He says he likes Doris, but June doesn't seem to care because she's really drunk.
I don't want to take advantage of you.
I don't mind.
Almost immediately, Bob hears someone knocking on the door, and it turns out that June has been expecting someone. Bob looks surprised, but it turns out to be officials from the Ministry of Defense who are there to get him ready for the weapons summit. June knows knows who they are, and Bob looks confused. Shortly after, they arrive at the weapons summit, and Teresa looks happy to see Bob. However, Bob says he wants an explanation about what's really going on with June. Teresa tries to change the topic, but Bob asks if she set him up with June. Before Teresa can respond, June confirms this, but says she would have asked him out anyway because she likes him. Bob looks pissed, but Teresa says she was only looking out for him by making sure he was dating the right person. She adds that June is perfect because she's American. Bob says he doesn't like June and that he wants to be with Doris instead. Teresa says he can't be with Doris because she's Colombian and it's really complicated. Bob looks confused, but Teresa adds that Doris is a cleaner and she doesn't really fit the narrative they want.
This has to stop. I need my own life.
Bob doesn't like this, but Teresa says he needs to do what's best for the government and the Ministry of Defense. She also mentions that sometimes saving the world isn't about flying into danger. It's about making sacrifices. She adds that she knows about Doris's dream to build a nursery in Colombia. Bob doesn't understand this, but Teresa eventually gets him to meet Jackson. Bob looks shocked and asks if everything Teresa did was to get him to shake Jackson's hand. Teresa doesn't have much to say, and Jackson says it's good to see Bob. After Jackson shakes Bob, he says he's happy that they were able to put the Colombian situation behind them. Bob asks what he means, and he says they've built a nursery for Doris and given her a first-class ticket back to Bogota. Bob looks annoyed and says he can't believe Teresa agreed to send Doris away. As he squeezes Jackson's hand, Teresa tells him to stop. Bob eventually leaves Jackson and breaks the ceiling as he flies away, saying it's supposed to be his day off. The officials inside the building look terrified.
It is supposed to be my day off!
And they immediately send out a notice for Bob to be arrested. Meanwhile, Bob goes to different airports to find Doris, but he's told that there are no flights going to Colombia today. With this, he realizes that Doris is still at the care home. When he gets there, the cameras in the vicinity spot him, and the cops immediately head to the care home. Before the cops can do anything, the people of Peckham, led by Maureen, block the entrance and refuse to let them go inside to arrest Bob because they all love him. Meanwhile, Bob finds Doris, who asks why he's on the news. Bob says it's because of her, but Doris tells him not to bring her into his mess. He eventually tells her to shut up and listen to what he wants to say. Before he can say anything, Javier shows up and says he loves Doris. He says he has already told her to stay in the UK with him because he believes they're meant to be together. Bob looks disappointed, and as he's about to walk away, Doris asks what he wanted to say. Bob then says he loves her, and Doris admits that she feels the same way. Bob says he thinks she should go to Colombia now that she has a nursery. He says he'll come with her, and Doris looks happy. Javier cannot believe this, but he realizes that Doris likes Bob.
Hey, Flame.
She hasty flying.
I'm gonna kill you, mate.
After this, Doris packs her things and says goodbye to Pat. As Bob walks outside with her, one of the cops shoots at him. Bob seems pissed and scolds the cop for doing that, and the man quickly apologizes. Bob then announces that he's resigning from the Ministry of Defense and going freelance. He says he's no longer a property of Britain, and that if anyone needs him, they can reach him via his phone number. He adds that he now has someone amazing in his life, and he wants to make her happy. As he's about to leave with Doris, Teresa appears behind them, but Bob just says goodbye to her. After this, Bob and Doris fly to Colombia, and Teresa looks disappointed. A while later, Teresa gets reassigned to Afghanistan, where she claims to be happy. Elsewhere, June still hasn't gotten over Bob, and she keeps his house of leaves close to her as a way to remember him. Elsewhere, the production team visits Bob in Colombia, and the director asks if he's happy. Bob says he is, but he complains that Doris never stops talking. Doris shows up and asks what he means, but he jokes about it.
She literally never shuts up.
Suddenly, he gets a call from someone who needs help, and as he gets ready to leave, Doris tells him to go and save the world. After being struck by a meteor, Bob gains superhuman abilities and decides to work for the UK government. However, he soon realizes that he no longer has control over his own life because the government doesn't really care about what's best for him. Since he can't continue to let that happen, he fights for his love and chooses to become a freelance hero so he can help people anytime he wants.